I'm Brian McMillen, photographer.
Brian McMillen, photographer. Thanks for this interview, Brian. You are a very important part of this documentary that's been put together regarding Keystone Korner and Todd Barkin, because you were there with the camera and you caught the legends, but a whole lot of other things were going on. Let's begin by telling us, how did you first come to know of Keystone?
Well, I was just getting into jazz, very interested, and that was the club, you know. It had the greatest artists of the day, and I just started going. The first group I saw was Chick Corea with Lenny White and Stanley Clarke and Mingo Lewis on congos, and Chick was playing the Rhodes, and that was what was happening in those days. And I just kind of kept going, and it turned out to be just about every week I'd be the first one in line every time, and because I wanted to sit up front, and I was just getting into photography at the time, so I wanted to be up front, you know, get a good angle. And manager Nancy Swingle noticed that I was there a lot, and she asked if I would want to be a gopher for the club, you know, just kind of do miscellaneous things to help out. And so I said, heck yeah, it's kind of living the dream. So I'd wash glasses behind the bar, work in the box office, do the door, be a bouncer, and then I'd
all of that.
I'd also take musicians to the radio interviews. They went every week to kind of plug the gig and spread the word about themselves, their art. And we're talking about great artists like Dexter Gordon and Stan Getz, Bill Evans, and Art Blakey, Max Roach. It was heavy, you know, the heaviest players around and pioneers that I was lucky enough to see and spend some time with.
Can you think of any moments that you had with some of the legends, conversations, for example, when you were taking them to a radio station for an interview? Tell us about some of the little things or conversations that went on with you.
Well, it was good quality time. The club was in San Francisco, and it usually went to K-Jazz, which is across the bay in Alameda. So we had that 45 minutes or so in the car each way, and sometimes we'd have little photo ops on the side, you know. I took Philly Joe Jones over, and afterwards there was a bar across the street. We went over there and started on the cognac there, and he's telling stories about Miles and everything. And this was in Miles's silent period. He was, you know, just gone underground. So he said, "Oh, Miles is going to come back, and he wants to play stuff like, you know, Miles Ahead and Milestone and all that stuff." I took that with a grain of salt, because I knew that Miles didn't go back. He always went ahead. But I figured, you know, everyone was hoping he would come back, and he eventually did. But he didn't play Milestones. And then took Bill Evans over. It was unbelievable for me. You know, I'm one of my gods, you know, Philly too, but you know, his famous trio in the 60s with Scott LaFaro and Paul Motian, Motion. You know, he was devastated when Scott died, and he was talking about that. And, he loved his current trio at the time with Mark Johnson and Joe LaBarbera. It was like giving him the same, you know, feeling as he had, or, you know, comparable to it with the other trio. And he had inadvertently mentioned, he was talking about Mark, but he called him Scott. And he caught himself, and he goes, "Wow, I've never done that before." And it's like, he kind of realized how he felt about Mark, because he knew how he felt about Scott. And that was a, you know, light bulb kind of went on.
Right.
So
What was it like at the club with that camera? We're looking at some of your work now. Extraordinary photos you took, Brian.
Thank you.
Talk to us about being there, and you were shooting over the shoulder of your mentor, Tom Copy.
Yeah.
But talk to us about the experience of being there, having the camera, getting positioned for a shot, and you were working in a small space too.
Small space, crowded, and the light was a challenge. You know, it's very contrasty.
Even with that, we're looking at your photos. You did a great job. Go ahead.
Well, I'm pushing the film to the limit. You know, I use Tri-X, but push it to 3200 ISO nowadays. And, you know.
And got the job done.
Tom and the other guys like Jim Marshall would give me tips about expose for the shadows and develop for the highlights and so on, just so, you know, everything's as close to being balanced as you can get. And I played with the development to try to lessen the contrast, and there's a whole bunch of steps to go through to make it the finished product you're envisioned.
What it became. Well, what about the energy between you and the artist that you were shooting? Did you ever have any kind of a conversation before or afterward in terms of, you know, I got you, or I'm going to get you? Did any?
Well, if possible, I ask them ahead of time, do you mind if I take some pictures, you know? It's better if you don't just start taking them. They don't know who you are, what you're doing and everything, and why you're messing around with the lights. I would go to sound checks, you know, like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and I don't have the crowd, and I can adjust the stage lights. I didn't generally use my own strobe or any light. I'd use the stage lights primarily. So I would be able to adjust those at the sound check, and they'd be set for the night too. Not just for my purposes, but for the audience too.
And what was it like working with Todd Barkin? You were at the bar, you were at the front door, you were all over the place. Talk to us about Todd, the kind of man he was, the person who
Todd's
put this
an artist,
together.
Foremost. He's an artist. He understands the artist's temperament and nurtures that. He lionized the musicians or anybody who showed creative spirit. Tom and I would provide photos, and other people. Kathy Sloan was there. Bruce Polanski was another regular photographer. And Todd would get the photos, and he'd see where our heart was through that. So he pretty much gave us carte blanche. You know, we didn't pay to get in, and we had backstage access. We could talk to anybody we wanted to, and sometimes we're pressed into service. You know, the doorman's sick or whatever, and I'm happy to do what, you know, contribute there. So. And, you know, people smoked back then in the clubs. It was a smoky jazz club. And some of the pictures show that.
Yeah, very cool.
It's a real clubby club.
Talk to us about the energy of the club, the smell of the club, and the kinds of people who came. And what did you take away from that experience from Keystone Korner? What has stayed with you all of this time?
Well, the musicians were world travelers all the time. They've seen a lot of cultures and commonalities in all the cultures. And they were universal thinkers, and it rubbed off on me. I mean, that's where I wanted to go and be. So, and also the staff and the patrons seemed to be of that bent also. So I think if you boil it down, that's what I was doing there. I wanted to be in that environment.
Right. And you stayed. What was special about Keystone Korner? There were other jazz clubs around, but what made Keystone Korner different and special from all of the others?
I would say that it was Todd's welcoming and nurturing of people with creative spirits. I mean, I never seen him throw anybody out or anything, except when somebody made a comment from the audience about Sonny Stitt's solo that he just played. You know, he said something along the lines that, you know, why don't you retire, you know, because he was getting on and maybe he didn't have the energy he used to have. But Todd threw that guy right out in the street.
Cool.
He couldn't deal with that. And I'm sure he got some applause from the audience when that happened. So.
Tell us about a very special moment that you remember from Keystone, and we're going to conclude this conversation with a bright moment. But before, tell us about just one thing that maybe no one has heard that went down at Keystone. Brian.
Well, you know, he had his holiday jazz festival.
Right, holiday jazz festival.
You know, holiday, end of the year. Star-studded. You'd have Art Blakey, Stan Getz, and Woody Shaw, and you know, all these people, heavy players playing together. And there were women too. I mean, there's Betty Carter, and they had Carla Bley, and you know, Mary Lou Williams, and some great. It seems people call it an old boys club, but it wasn't that exactly. It might have been more men. I don't know, but. Same spirit though. And, the crowd seemed to be a higher percentage of white people, and most of the musicians were black. You know, but it's integrated. You know, the music is what it is. No one's looking at your skin in that environment. So
there was a Todd. It sounds as if he brought only humanity to the club. That is what
bright moments.
He fostered bright moments. Let's conclude with a bright moment.
Well, I just wish that there was a way to keep that thing going on. I know the cast of characters would be different, but a lot of people would love to see it happen, and Todd would too. But it's, you know, in this world of economics and everything, another challenge. So we're keep holding that thought and keeping our hopes open for it. So we need some more of those bright moments today.